Hello readers by eyes and by ears, this is Mari Chan and welcome back to my channel. Today we are continuing with another reading of Ballad of Sword and Wine, Volume 2, also known as Tang Jiu by Tang Jiu Qing or T97, and we are covering chapters 61 through 64 today. I hope you all enjoy. Who knows, maybe I'll throw a bonus in there, depending on how I feel. It is Friday, so I have more time to record, but anyway, let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Chapter 61. Collapse. Rain began to fall just before dawn. Chunyang, washing up in the resting hall, wiped his face and looked out at the drizzle of misty rain interspersed with flakes of snow. Those who served in the courtyard were already bustling about. "Tell the kitchen to light the stove," Chunyang instructed the attendants beside him. "Serve the medicine while it's hot, then prepare the ginger soup. Have masters and the judges' officials' robes been steamed and perfumed with incense? Hurry and send them over. The ground is slippery from the rain and snow. Step carefully, lest you fall and disgrace yourself." Chunyang held an umbrella overhead and made his way to the kitchen, where he checked on the preparations for breakfast. When the cook saw him, he immediately called the attendant to fetch the meal boxes. "I heard last night that the judge had fallen ill, so I made fish soup and some light side dishes. There's porridge and steamed twisted rolls." The cook handed a stack of other boxes to Chunyang. "Breakfast for you, gentlemen. You were on guard all of last night. Drink something hot to dispel the chill." Chunyang put a hand on the containers and laughed. "All right. And you even prepared Xiaoju wine for Gujin. I'll thank you on his behalf. Have them serve master's breakfast without delay. I'm heading over to attend him now." The cook saw him out. Chunyang turned down any help from the kitchen assistant and hurried back into the courtyard under the safety of his umbrella. No servant was allowed to touch the daily meals of the personal guards out of sight of the cook. The guards took turns to collect them personally. This was a strict rule established all the way back in Libei. Chunyang arrived at the courtyard and called down the others. They stood and ate together. Mouthful of steamed bun, Ding Tao looked toward the house. "Master is up." "Is the carriage ready?" Gujin asked. "It's a little late today." Chunyang nodded. "I didn't expect the weather today. Master will still get rained on later when he's registering his attendance and standing by at the palace. The Lord Judge's cold is bound to linger. Does he not plan on taking a leave of absence?"
Who is he asking?
Gujin and Ding Tao exchanged a glance, then turned as one to Qiao Tianya, who had shown up for the free meal. Qiao Tianya gulped a huge mouthful of porridge and held up a finger. The other three said in unison, "Swallow first." He swallowed, then explained. "He won't risk even a single day off. My master is still a newly appointed official. How would he dare take leave when the senior officials above him are still hard at work? He can't be busier than the chief commander, can he?" "Your embroidered uniform guard are terrible," said Ding Tao. "You have to talk about seniority even when falling ill." "There's nothing we can do," replied Qiao Tianya. "Everyone, above and below, is watching him." As the four of them ate and chatted, the door to Xiao Chiye's chamber opened. Maidservants began to move in and out with serving trays in hand. The masters were awake. After a full night's sleep in Xiao Chiye's arms, Shen Zhiquan's fever had broken. He was drenched in sweat, but the rash on his neck was still red. Xiao Chiye had already dressed. Seeing Shen Zhiquan stir lethargically, he laid a hand against his forehead and said, "There's medicine on the table. Drink it while it's hot." Slipping into his boots, Shen Zhiquan got out of bed to drink the medicine. They stood back to back, dressing before the mirrors, as the sound of cloak rustled around them. Shen Zhiquan fastened his belt and pushed the window open to peer up at the sky. This rain came at a bad time. If anything happened last night, we would have heard about it. It's not too late to hurry and unclog the ditches today. Xiao Chiye came closer, stepping out of reach of the maidservant behind him who was trying to fasten his crown. Shen Zhiquan reached out to take it. Xiao Chiye propped his elbows on the window ledge, and Shen Zhiquan put it on for him. Eyes met eyes. Smells bitter, Xiao Chiye said. If you come closer, Shen Zichuan said, the bitterness will be even stronger. The maidservants bowed low, not daring to make a sound. Xiao Tianya was holding up an umbrella as they stepped out of the door. Shen Zichuan descended the stairs, but hadn't yet crossed the courtyard when he saw Tan Tai Hu hurrying over. Tan Tai Hu looked less than pleased to see Shen Zichuan, but still bowed a greeting before rushing up the stairs. Lao Hu, Chen Yang approached him. What's the matter? Xiao Chiye had already stepped into the courtyard. Gu Jing draped his overcoat over his shoulders as Xiao Chiye looked at Tan Tai Hu without a word. Supreme Commander! Tan Tai Hu dropped to one knee. Urgent word from the Donglong Street Patrol Squad. Ohua Pavilion has collapsed. Shen Zichuan halted his steps and waited for Tan Tai Hu to continue. Tan Tai Hu wiped rainwater from his face. It collapsed on the second young master of the Xi clan. But more importantly, His Majesty was inside too. Xiao Chiye's gaze was piercing. Above, the rain and snow seemed to fall harder. Shen Zichuan took long strides out of the office of the embroidered uniform guard. Gu Qingqing was waiting at the bottom of the steps. As Shen Zichuan fastened his authority token, he was already saying, Tell me what happened, in detail. The embroidered uniform guard followed him swiftly out of the courtyard. Gu Qingqing spoke low, his hand on his blade hilt. His Majesty snuck out. Oh, this is what Shen Zichuan was. Okay, anyway, sorry. No one knew about it when the building collapsed this morning. While the courtesans were being dug out, men from the 8 great battalions were still searching for Shi Hongxuan in the wreckage. It wasn't until morning court was about to commence and the eunuchs lifted the curtain that they realized His Majesty was gone. They went first to Caiwei Palace to check with concubine Mu, but she was as clueless as they. As you can imagine, chaos erupted. They requested the presence of the Empress Dowager and Third Lady Hua, who interrogated the palace maids serving the emperor. That's when they found His Majesty had disguised himself as a eunuch and insisted on going to Ohua Pavilion with Shi Hongxuan last night. Shen Zichuan's brows were drawn in. There are several layers of guards in the inner palace. Without help, he wouldn't even make it out of Mingley Hall. That's the odd thing. Gu Qingqing lowered his voice to a whisper. During my investigation, I heard the guards say no one came in or out of his chambers all night. Shen Zichuan watched, detached, as the 8 great battalions marched past in formation. His expression remained unchanged. He had hurried the entire way in the rain. No one dared even hold up their umbrellas at the moment, lest they look more concerned with their own health than the emperor's. Dark clouds shadowed the face of every official, as somber as if their own parents had died. All right, so who did it? Hailiang Yi and Xiao Chiye stood before the rubble that had been Ohua Pavilion. Its collapse had brought down half the street of closely cluttered buildings with it. The sewage in the gutters had overflowed in the downpour, and all of Donglong Street reeked to high heaven. No one could pass without wading through the swill. Pan Xiangjie, the Minister of Works, was the current head of the Pan clan, one of the 8 great clans. Although he shared the same surname as Pan Zhugui, that was where the similarities ended. A eunuch, no matter how powerful, was nowhere near a noble minister's league. Pan Xiangjie was the same age as Hailiang Yi. He had never dared commit any major blunder in his post. Knowing he would never climb to the heights of the Grand Secretariat, he had always been careful and prudent in hopes of a peaceful retirement, especially since his son was already Vice Minister of the Ministry of Revenue. Never had he expected to wake up to that morning to the sky falling in. He swayed on his feet, so overcome with anxiety his hands were trembling. It was all he could do to urge repeatedly, Hurry! Hurry up and dig! His Majesty is still inside! The rain seemed to have washed all expression from Hailiang Yi's face. He had never thought Li Jianheng's mind so addled that he would go so far just to play. Several times he wiped rainwater from his eyes as though wiping away tears. Turning to Xiao Chiye, he said, Dig. Get His Majesty out first. Xiao Triet unfastened his overcoat and waded through the muck to take a closer look. The current commander of the 8 Great Battalions was Han Cheng's younger brother, Han Jin, who had rolled up the legs of his trousers and lifted the hem of his robe to follow Xiao Triet down. Supreme Commander! Han Jin shouted through the rain. The base of the building has been hollowed out. We can't dig down there. Not only had the foundation been hollowed out, it was filled with large copper vats. No one was bold enough to mention it. The vats had been smashed to shards when the building collapsed. If Li Tianheng was down there, he was surely a goner. He would be the first emperor in the history of the Zhou Empire to be crushed to death while sneaking out to play. Which historian would dare record this? The very thought was crushingly depressing. His Majesty would have been resting in the upper levels last night. Shen Zichuan removed his blade and sloshed forward into the water. And this place isn't deep. There's no guarantee it won't collapse further. Xiao Triet straightened up. Get the men from the Ministry of Works. Cun Yu, having rushed over, arrived at this moment. The instant Shen Zichuan saw him, he turned to Hai Liangyi. Secretariat Elder, it is imperative that the public ditch be dredged today. If this rain doesn't let up, the whole city will flood. We're right up against the Kailing River at the back, too, Cun Yu said. I just came from there. The buildings along the banks have already collapsed. Their foundations are soaked through. How long has it been since the stone of the dam was last repaired? Once the water level rises, half of Chengdu will flood. What has the Ministry of Works been doing all these years? Pan Xiangjie, you adult fool! How many times have I told you about this? Pan Xiangjie fell to his knees in the mud. What could I have done? The man's hair was practically gray, yet he wailed like a child. How can you blame me? The Ministry of Revenue lord their power over us. I mentioned this to them years and years ago. What can I do if they don't allocate the funds and manpower? Cun Chunyi, what could I possibly do? He scooped up the filthy water in his hands, struggling to speak through his sobs. Banging his head against the ground as he kowtowed, he cried, We're all going to pay for this with our lives. You are a senior official of the imperial court, Hai Liangyi bellowed. Pull yourself together. His Majesty's fate hangs in the balance. We don't know if he's dead or alive. This is an emergency. If you want to shift the blame, at least wait until we get him out. Take 800 men from the Imperial Army's patrol to join the Ministry of Works' efforts to unclog the public ditch immediately. Tear down the illegally built houses. As for the Ministry of Revenue, have them total the state treasury money and gather those whose houses have collapsed at the Temple of Guilt so we can centralize the distribution of aid. The 8 Great Battalions shall patrol the major city gates. Entry and exit into the city must be accompanied by official documentation. We are at a critical juncture. We will need everyone to work as one to stabilize the situation. Don't lose your heads now. Hai Liangyi turned to Shen Zichuan. The embroidered uniform guard guards the inner palace. We can't afford to let anyone take advantage of the situation to stir up trouble. Should anyone defy these directives, you have my order to execute them on the spot. The rain poured around them. Hai Liangyi's direct, merciless commands instantly buttressed the shaky morale of the crowd. He took a few steps forward and removed his black official's hat. His Majesty is the Son of Heaven. Water running down his face, Hai Liangyi said with finality, Our great Zhou has reigned for a century. This is not the day it will fall. Li Tianheng lay face down beneath the broken lumber. Icy water pouring up his neck jolted him awake. He found he could barely breathe. His chest was tightly wedged in the rubble, and his ribs ached terribly. He coughed and rasped out, Help! The word was hoarse and weak, too soft to be heard over the downpour. Li Tianheng shifted his gaze and saw that the courtesans beside him had gone cold. Her ghastly pale flesh was squashed between broken walls, the splayed strands of her hair tacky with blood. Li Tianheng began to tremble. He could no longer recognize this as the beautiful woman who had clapped and danced for him last night. Help! Li Tianheng struggled to say, his head hanging. Help! Choking coughs rang out below him. Shi Hongxuan was half submerged, his torso horrifically bent backward. He had crashed down right on top of the copper vats, and his back was bloody and mangled. Gasping for air, he said, "Your Majesty, stop calling. They can't hear you." Li Jianheng was beside himself with horror as he elbowed at the broken pieces of lumber, all in vain. He'd lost one of his shoes, and he was so cold his face was bloodless. "No, someone will definitely come to save me." "Of course." Shi Hongxuan chuckled quietly. "You're the son of heaven." "What are you laughing at?" Li Jianheng demanded. Shi Hongxuan spat sandy mud. "This thing called fate. Don't you find it strange how people seem to repeat the same life with each cycle of reincarnation?" Li Jianheng widened his eyes, but could see nothing. "No," he said darkly. "There's no cycle." "Tell me." Shi Hongxuan shifted his body with some difficulty. "Your Majesty's birth mother, with the surname Yue, didn't she drown to death too?"
Didn't she?
The foul water splashed from his neck down his spine. Under this incessant drip, Li Jianheng swallowed. With difficulty, he recalled those ephemeral childhood memories. He looked at the courtesan's bloated and pale flesh again. This time, he seemed to see his mother there beside him. The woman's face was pressed into the swill bucket, her fingers having clawed at the ground until they were bloody stumps. As water splashed his face, Li Jianheng saw her ghastly white neck, her pallid arms.
Didn't she?
Hot tears pricked at Li Jianheng's eyes. He frantically covered them with his hands and shouted, "Shut up! Shut up!" Shi Hongxuan fell silent. But Li Jianheng didn't want to be the next corpse any longer. He cried and cursed, hurling abuse and profanities. "Don't mention her! We are the supreme ruler on the imperial throne. Our—" Panting heavily behind his fingers, Li Jianheng's face was harrowed. "Our mother is the Empress Dowager!" Chapter 62. Family Background. Li Jianheng never spoke of his birth mother to anyone. This subject was his nightmare. His mother had no formal title and was merely a lowly palace maid. The official records had her surname shoddily listed as Yue, and that was all there was. Not long after Li Jianheng was born, the Xiande Emperor's birth mother, Lady Lu, brought the babe into her palace. However, the only care he received there was being fed and clothed. At the age he should have begun schooling, no one gave him a thought. Thus he grew up ignorant and incompetent, and spent all his time playing with eunuchs. So what I said was right, yeah. He had no mother, only a wet nurse responsible for his daily care. His nurse was the arranged partner of the Xiande Emperor's personal eunuch. She recognized power and little else, and as a result, mistreated Li Jianheng where she could get away with it. Every day, she dressed him up enough to appear presentable. Yet, he often woke up hungry in the night, back in the privacy of his room. Once, Li Jianheng mentioned this to his older brother, and the Xiande Emperor threw a fit at his personal eunuch, who then went home and beat the nurse. From that day forward, the nurse gave Li Jianheng nothing but cold food and the cold shoulder. She never hit him, but had a tongue so sharp Li Jianheng never dared mention his treatment again. Before he learned how to speak a whole sentence, he already knew a plethora of vulgar insults. His nurse told him his birth mother was a cheap whore of the palace. Because of her illicit pregnancy, the lady she served kept her inside to convalesce. In reality, she was kept indoors for years, constantly plagued by illness. Even then, she secretly wished to one day meet her son. When Li Jianheng was 5, the Guangcheng Emperor came to Lady Lu's palace to check the academic progress of Li Jianyuan, who would become the Xiande Emperor. As they spoke, the Guangcheng Emperor spotted Li Jianheng playing with crickets and called him over. This was his first time meeting his father. Fuck. Oh my gosh. The Guangcheng Emperor asked him some questions. Li Jianheng held a cricket tightly in his hands. He didn't dare look at the emperor. He spoke ineloquently, stuttering over every question. The Guangcheng Emperor found this child stupid. Li Jianheng was already 5, yet was unable to articulate himself, had not an ounce of decorum, and appeared meek. He possessed none of the aura of a royal scion. For his part, Li Jianheng had very much wanted to talk to the Guangcheng Emperor but was terrified by this stranger who didn't feel like his father. During the lengthy questioning, he began to cry. The Guangcheng Emperor utterly disdained him. As a result, the first time he saw his father was also the last. Only after the Guangcheng Emperor left did Li Jianheng realize he'd unwittingly squashed the cricket to death in his small hands. Back then, Li Jianyuan was still in good health, the most favored son after the crown prince. He, too, thought Li Jianheng useless, but still he pitied him. So he petitioned the Guangcheng Emperor and started to bring Li Jianheng along to classes with him. When Li Jianheng got to know the other princes, he found they were all living in the lap of luxury. He slowly came to realize that these boys weren't truly his brothers. They ridiculed him. They spoke of protocols and propriety. They made him bow and scrape before him. Li Jianheng didn't know he wasn't required to kneel and kowtow to his brothers upon seeing them. This was what they taught him, and not a single eunuch or palace maid ever stepped forward to pull him up. My God, y'all, I'm struggling with this. It was only when the crown prince and Li Jianyuan were around that everyone acted with brotherly affection. But Li Jianheng didn't know what to say and had no one to talk to. Gradually, he stopped coming to class on time. He started to lie to Li Jianyuan, feigning illness and sleeping in, doing his best to avoid his lessons at every opportunity. Eventually, Li Jianyuan felt Li Jianheng was a lost cause. He couldn't be taught or set straight, and gave up on the boy. One day, Li Jianheng followed a eunuch through a dog hole in the palace walls. Whenever he squeezed his way through, the eunuchs would cover their mouths and snicker, then give him cast-off candies from the imperial bakery. The child was like a puppy coaxed into wagging his tail for a few scraps. Through that dog hole, he obtained many foods he had never tasted before. It was also through that dog hole that he first saw his mother. Li Jianheng didn't recognize this woman with the surname Yue. A eunuch egged Li Jianheng on, telling him to call her a useless invalid. So Li Jianheng spat on her and called her just that. The woman had leaned against the wall and cried as she gazed at him. Li Jianheng found her odd, too. The way she looked at him frightened him, so much that he felt like crying, too. His nurse had scolded him again when he returned, but when Li Jianheng got up to pee in the middle of the night, he heard his nurse having a secret tryst with the same eunuch who had goaded him to curse the strange woman. He accidentally kicked over the chamber pot and was caught red-handed by the two of them. After that night, newly afraid Li Jianheng would rat them out, the nurse gave him plenty of candy and never scolded him again. Instead, she held him in her arms and cuddled him all day long. There were many kinds of sweets, including one called silk-nested tiger's eye candy. There was only so much of it every day, and Li Jianheng couldn't bear to eat it. He tagged along behind Li Jianyuan and offered it to his older brother. That year, Li Jianyuan's health started to deteriorate until he was too sick to even attend his classes. Lady Lu ordered an investigation of his food and drink, but turned up nothing. Every night, she wept at Li Jianyuan's side. The imperial physicians came and went, but Li Jianyuan never improved. At the same time, the nurse also stopped giving Li Jianheng sweets. Li Jianheng had cried and wailed, demanding them, but the nurse told him the useless invalid woman he had cursed in the eastern courtyard had told on him and forbade him from eating candy again. Li Jianheng couldn't shake that silk-nested tiger's eye from his mind. He hated that sickly woman. The nurse assured him that if Li Jianheng wanted that candy again, he merely had to tell Lady Lu that the sickly woman had given him the sweets to begin with. Li Jianheng didn't dare tell Lady Lu, but he secretly told Li Jianyuan. Li Jianyuan had stared at him from where he lay on his sickbed. In that instant, Li Jianheng felt his elder brother look just like his father. A short time later, Li Jianheng was awakened in the middle of the night. The nurse led him out to the main hall, which was filled with splashing sounds. From where he stood behind the hanging curtain, he saw a blur of human figures. I don't like where this is going. Oh my God, help me. Li Jianyuan, who was lying on his bed with an overcoat draped over his shoulders, beckoned to him. Li Jianheng ran over. That sickly woman was half naked, her head pressed into the bucket of filthy water. Again and again, her face was shoved in. As she choked and coughed below the surface, water poured into her mouth and nose. Her fingernails, clawing at the ground, had become bloodied pulp. Li Jianyuan held onto Li Jianheng and said nothing. The sight frightened him to no end, and he glanced back many times at his brother. There was no smile on Li Jianyuan's face, and so Li Jianheng didn't dare to smile either. Every time the woman was shoved down, there came a gurgling sound. She raked her nails against the bucket in agony, her bony fingers clawing out wood shavings, turning her nails into a dirty, mangled mess. Li Jianheng had looked at her, but he couldn't remember her face clearly anymore. Only the sound of sloshing water stuck in his memory. The nurse standing behind him was a tall, robust woman, which Li Jianheng didn't like. All the women he chose in the future were either petite or sickly. Li Jianheng didn't like water either. After that, he found it filthy. From that night on, the nurse treated him very well, and so did Li Jianyuan. No one mentioned his studies anymore, and Li Jianyuan no longer made him practice calligraphy. He even assigned eunuchs to entertain him. Li Jianheng was finally free to play from morning until he fell asleep at night. When he was in his teens and old enough to move into his own manor, Li Jianyuan sent him a number of pretty women. Once Li Jianheng got a taste of the pleasures of the bedroom, he spiraled out of control. It wasn't until many years later that Li Jianheng learned that sickly woman who he had watched drown was surnamed Yue. Okay. Our mother is the Empress Dowager. Fuck. Keep reading, Mari. Li Jianheng's fingers trembled. He seemed to be saying it to Xi Hongxuan and, at the same time, to himself. He muttered it over and over like a man gone mad. Xi Hongxuan sniffled and listened to Li Jianheng rave. He couldn't help but grin. You sick bat. Your Majesty, if you truly wish everyone to think this, then you must accord the Empress Dowager the honor befitting a mother. The Empress Dowager, he hissed in pain, then continued, lacks a son at the moment. Li Jianheng felt a stabbing pain in his chest as he gasped for breath. He hastily wiped his tears with wet fingers. We know. I doubt you know, Xi Hongxuan said. Who gave you the audacity to speak to us in such a manner? Li Jianheng demanded. I mean, honestly, for real, like, sir, you can't afford to be this way with the Emperor still alive. He needs to be dead before you get your rocks off. I mean, it won't feel the same because he's dead, but like, sir, let him live through this and see what happens. The words of a man on his deathbed always come from the heart. Blood oozed from the corners of Shi Hongxuan's mouth. He spat a few more times. "If you and I don't get out of here, there will be no sovereign and his minister. Just two drowning rats in a pit. What kind of emperor are you? Back when Xiao lifted you onto the dragon throne, you ingratiated yourself with him and worshipped him like an ancestor. Have you forgotten? You have always been his master. He's supposed to risk his life for you. What logic is there in parents being grateful to their sons and grandchildren? The Xiao clan enjoys prestige and power only because of the Li Bei armored cavalry. Grateful to Xiao Zhiye? Such a ridiculous sentiment would be totally unheard of under the Guangcheng emperor, only a few decades ago. I truly worry when I look at you. How does it feel being a waste of an emperor? You sit so high. Yet you aren't even as happy as I was when I romped around the saltworks as an imperial merchant. If you continue to suffer such trifling indignities in your position, you may as well drown here with me today." In pain after having spoken so much, he grimaced and spent a moment catching his breath. As he listened to Li Jianheng's sobs, he began to weep himself. "Your Majesty." Shi Hongxuan laid his heart bare. "My mother was a woman from Qingzhou, of low birth. She only won my father's favor because her ma and pa made some money with guidance from the late Madame Yao. I might be a lawful second son, but I lead a dog's life back at home. Why do you think I preferred to make my living on the Sea of Shuhai when I was 18, battered by wind and waves? It's because my parents wanted to hand the entire family fortune to my eldest brother. Later, I met with disaster at sea and was badly injured. My constitution was wrecked. I recuperated in Qingzhou for the better part of a year. See how obese I am now? It's all because of the tonifying herbs I consumed that brought me back from the brink of death. Ugly, right? But before I was injured, I was a handsome man. Before I set out to sea, I met a woman and fell in love. We were engaged to be married, but by the time I returned, she had married another. She had become my dearest sister-in-law. What a dedicated brother Shiguan was. After hearing of my ill fate, he even took care of my woman for me. Is there any more wonderful sibling bond? I'll be thanking him all my life." Shi Hongxuan cried and laughed as he spoke into their damp and narrow prison. "All my life? Your Majesty, who in this world isn't pitiful? Out of pity for me, would you let me become the Grand Secretary who wields power over the whole imperial court? You pitied Xiao and truly made him your supreme commander. At one stroke, the most sought-after man in Chudu. But who will pity you? If Xiao were sincere toward you, would he have let Xiao Jiming say what he did before the throne? Wasn't that just Li Bei throwing their weight around?" He took a breath to continue. "And then you have that 8th son of the Shun clan, cursed with Shun Wei as his old man. What kind of place do you think the imperial prison is?" He fell into Jilei's hands at 15 and might as well have been skinned alive the way he spent those days in prison. He may be free now, but look at him. He's clearly more specter than man. Everyone in this world is pitiful. If you pity every life, how can you be emperor? As the saying goes, every man for himself, and the devil takes the hindmost." "Your Majesty, don't listen to those blabbermouths who speak of your lowly birth mother. Your surname is Li. Mine is Shi. For us, that's enough. From birth, our classes, both the low-born and the noble, define us. All those platitudes claiming no one is born to rule except through merit are empty words meant to comfort fools. Without order, there would be no countries and states. Your name is Li Jianheng. You are naturally superior to Xiao Zhiye. So what if the Xiao clan dares harbor ill intent? What are you afraid of? You are the one acknowledged by the people of this land. They can rattle their sabers. In the end, they will be nothing but traitors. If you raise your arms and call for aid, who in our great Zhou would disobey? This is what it is to be the son of heaven. This is what it is to be the son of heaven. The words thundered in Li Jianheng's ears and snapped him to his senses. In this wet and filthy pit, for the very first time, he came to truly understand who he was. Before he knew it, tears had covered his face. He reflected on all that had led up to this day and felt he had been living in vain. Shi Hongxuan, unwilling to let this opportunity slip, strained to continue. They laugh at you for being uneducated and cowardly. But who in this world doesn't fear death? Let them talk. The blade isn't against their throats. When it is, 9 out of 10 will piss their pants. You're a sovereign, not a craftsman. When it comes to matters of learning, the scholars from the Imperial College will provide the answers. As for government affairs, isn't that what the Grand Secretariat is for? Does it not exist to advise you? You are an emperor. You are the emperor. We are the emperor. Li Tianheng felt both hot and cold as he trembled and repeated, You're right. We are the emperor. Shi Hongxuan was listening closely. Seeing that he'd more or less achieved his desired effect, he heaved a sigh of relief. The fucking nerve of whoever had tampered with Old Hua Pavilion. With the building so damaged, any evidence of foul play would be washed away, and blame would fall squarely on Shi Hongxuan's head. If he couldn't win Li Jianheng over now, the storm of indictments from the Chief Surveillance Bureau alone would flay him alive. He could wave goodbye to his newly appointed position as the secretary for the Bureau of Evaluations of the Ministry of Personnel. Hailiang Yi might well chop his head off. Marinating in this filthy water, Shi Hongxuan carefully shifted through his network of connections. He didn't want to die or be exiled. It had been no easy feat to take Shi Guan out of play and climb to his current position, not to mention the good fortune of meeting such a rare good master as Li Jianheng. No, he had to live. Lips blue from blood loss, Shi Hongxuan chanted silently to himself.
Hurry up.
Xue Xiuzhou, Hailiang Yi, Shen Zichuan, or even Xiao Chiye, whoever it was, hurry up and dig them out. Li Jianheng must not die here. If he died here, everything Shi Hongxuan had done would go down the drain. Just as Shi Hongxuan was about to close his eyes, a low rumble sounded just above them. Debris from the broken wall rattled down, followed by a surge of putrid water that brought with it distant voices and the sound of heavy rain. Shi Hongxuan almost wept with joy. He could hear Li Jianheng being pulled to safety. Then, under the shouts of the Imperial Army as they counted off and heaved, the heavy structure pinning him down was lifted. The water had already reached Shi Hongxuan's waist. He waved his arms feebly and yelled, Help! Help! Xiao Chiye looked down at Shi Hongxuan from above. The unending rain washed down on him. Shi Hongxuan felt a chill up his spine. Even as the water swelled to Shi Hongxuan's chest, Xiao Chiye looked as if he had no intention to pull him up. Xiao'er! Shi Hongxuan spat, every syllable laced with hatred. The flood water was breaking over his head. He choked on foul water and flailed, struggling to breathe. By the time Xiao Chiye reached in to drag Shi Hongxuan out, his mouth was filled with putrid water. Shi Hongxuan dug his fingers hard into Xiao Chiye's arms. Gasping for breath, he craned his neck pathetically and hissed, Fuck your mother! Xiao Chiye shoved him down with a hand. Shi Hongxuan clawed at the mud as sludge filled his mouth and nose. He was suffocating. He scratched with all his might, but he couldn't budge Xiao Chiye's iron arm. Xiao Chiye clearly had the intent to kill. But he couldn't actually hold Shi Hongshuan down until he died. There were people behind him, and Li Jianheng had been awake and loosened when he was brought out. Xiao Chuye lifted Shi Hongshuan by the back of his collar and leaned down to say menacingly, "Why don't you say that one more time?" Y'all, these captures are, I can't even talk properly. Scaptures? What the hell is a scapture? These chapters are really, God, how will I persist? Okay, let's go. Chapter 63, Dredging the Ditches. I feel like this chapter is not going to be any better. Oh, God. Shi Hongshuan shook as he puked up sewage, his face terrifyingly pale. Behind them, Han Jin saw that something wasn't right and hastily waded over. Xiao Chuye let go and watched as Shi Hongshuan was carried to safety. As the rain drummed down, the watching officials sobbed as they chased Li Jianheng's sedan and swarmed toward the palace gates. Pan Xiangjie ran until his shoes fell off. The old man lifted the hem of his robe, panting and heaving, yet not forgetting every few strides to call out, "Your Majesty!" The crowd around him was in a similar state. Only Hai Liangyi remained as dignified as ever as he kept pace with the sedan all the way back to the palace. The waiting imperial physicians rushed over to meet them, and the chaotic procession continued into the inner palace, where Mu Zhu, plainly dressed in white, ran out to receive them. When she saw Li Jianheng covered in blood, her tears flowed without cease. The empress, too, came out with Hua Xiangyi at her arm. She turned to Han Cheng, instantly hostile. "I understand you're anxious, but how could you allow the elder officials to run all this way? They're advanced in age, and now they've been soaked in rain. It will make matters that much worse if anything happens to them." The embroidered uniformed guard knelt before her with a rustle of wet cloth. "This humble subject has erred," Han Cheng said. "Quick, prepare soup and distribute dry clothes." The Empress Dowager next addressed the ministers. "It touches me to see everyone's sincere loyalty. His Majesty is safely back in the palace. There's no need for any rush. It's so cold out. Everyone, please head to the adjoining hall to get out of the wind and have a bowl of hot soup. We can't afford anyone to fall ill at this juncture." The officials kowtowed in gratitude. The Empress Dowager continued. "Grand Secretary Hai and everyone in the Grand Secretariat, as well as the excellencies of the various ministries, please step this way for a word." Sun Yu wasn't among those summoned. He had remained on Donglong Street to help dredge the public sewers with Xiao Chuye. Yu Xiaozai, the lowly censor from the Chief Surveillance Bureau, followed carrying Sun Yu's straw cloak. Xiao Chuye's hair and face were thoroughly drenched. Everyone on the street shivered in the chilly wind, yet he wasn't affected at all. When they were digging the two men out earlier, he had lifted a beam weighing nearly 100 caddies by himself. This isn't a footnote, but 100 caddies is approximately 110 to 133 pounds, or 50 kilograms. At present, he was wrapping a handkerchief around the web between his thumb and index finger with a grim expression. The low-lying districts are full of poor households. To even afford a house of shoddy lumber is a victory for them. When they heard the houses must be demolished, 9 out of 10 refused. With his bare feet still underwater, Sun Yu lifted the hem of his soaked official's robe and tucked it into his belt. Today, Donglong Street was the only street flooded because it runs along the Kailing River. But if the rain doesn't stop, Supreme Commander, by tomorrow the other streets will be the same. If the imperial court is willing to offer a subsidy of 5 taels of silver to each household, they will be willing, Tan Tai-hu said, covered in mud to the waist. They just want a roof over their heads. As long as we fork out the money, it won't be a problem. This humble subject feels that those protesting loudest are actually the large manors. Many of those residences violated regulations by expanding their property into the public ditches. And there are plenty of cases where they've come to blows over a few inches of space. Now that we're telling them to tear their walls down, there's no way 5 taels of silver would convince them to wreck their perfectly good homes. They won't even come to the door when we knock. I'm afraid it won't be easy to come to an agreement regarding any subsidy. Sun Yu had served in the court for a long time. He was all too familiar with the ins and outs of politics. It was only because of Grand Secretary Hai that the Ministry of Revenue was willing to shell out for aid relief to the flood victims here. That sum still has to be accounted for. They'll never agree to pay 5 taels to each household as well. Your Excellency, excuse an uncouth fellow like me for griping, but how can you still be thinking about money now? Tan Tai Hu's chest heaved. Once the water rises and people start dying, the city will become a breeding ground for disease. At that point, even a hoard of silver would be useless. Well now, don't get so worked up. Yu Xiaocai raised his hands placatingly. You're not familiar with the Treasury's constraints. The Ministry of Revenue has its own difficulties. It's not that they begrudge this amount of money. The annual review nears. Why wouldn't they want to resolve this business as neatly as possible? Averting potential disaster will make them look good too. They should be only too happy to sign off on it. So what's stopping them? They're embarrassingly short of cash. Let's say they take this sum of money out now to deal with the emergency. In the coming days, we will enter the spring plowing season. Several regions were struck by natural disaster last year. In those places, there was no harvest at all. After the local governments send in their reports, the Ministry of Revenue must deliberate over the allocation of money so the affected prefectural yamen or provincial administration commissioners can buy seed from neighboring provinces with good harvests. This is a major undertaking concerning the sustenance and survival of hundreds of thousands of people. How could they dare touch the remaining money in the state treasury? The censor continued. Since these people expanded their properties illegally, by law, they should be punished for illegal appropriation of the public ditches. Now, instead of punishing them, you want the court to hand them money. If the Ministry of Revenue doesn't think this through, they'll be indicted by our Chief Surveillance Bureau in the future. Really, everyone is in a tight spot. Yu Xiaocai had an uncanny ability to calm people. When those lightly accented syllables left his mouth, one felt even the most major issue could wait. Every word he spoke was the truth. He took no sides, but laid out the problem precisely as he saw it. The success of the spring planting season in the various regions determined the empire's course of action in this year. The army provisions of 2 major strategic frontier lands relied on the harvests of Juexi's 13 cities and Hezhou's shipping routes. No one dared be careless. This matter took precedence over everything else. But where did that leave them? Going ahead with the demolition by force would rouse public wrath. Half the men of the imperial army hailed from military households in Chudu. There weren't many who lived on Donglong Street, but there were some. When Hailiang Yi entrusted this matter to the imperial army, he was effectively entrusting it to Xiao Chiye. Had it been handed to the 8 great battalions, there would be no consideration or compromise. Han Jin would level everything. No one could overlook the potential risk of such brash action. Hailiang Yi had meant for Xiao Chiye to think of a solution. Xiao Chiye pulled the handkerchief tighter around his hand. As he opened his mouth to speak, he saw a man walking toward them through the rain. Shan Zichuan cupped his hands in greeting. I guessed everyone would be here. Any progress on the public ditches? It's a problem, Sun Yu sighed gustily. We can't just tear the houses down. As I understand it, the difficulty for the Ministry of Revenue is that they can't predict the expenses for the upcoming spring planting. Although Shan Zichuan looked calm, his cheeks were flushed. He looked out into the rain. This expenditure can be estimated. This humble one has seen the embroidered uniform guard's archives, so I have some insights. Supreme Commander, if I may. Xiao Chiye pinned his gaze on him. Please go ahead, Judge Shan. Shan Zichuan took a moment to gather his thoughts. Last year, when the new emperor ascended the throne, a general amnesty was granted across the empire. As part of this, Juexi got a 3/10 exemption on their taxes. They had a bumper crop last year. Other than Huaizhou and Dunzhou, which both reported impact from disasters, the rest of the regions brought in their harvest as usual. Supreme Commander, Dunzhou's granaries truly are hard-pressed this year. The prefectural yamen will need to buy seed from Cizhou, whose granaries are filled to the brim. But there were heavy storms at the start of the year, and the snow in Zhongbo crushed many houses. Did not the heir of Libei set aside 40,000 taels from Libei's military budget this year to relieve Cizhou? Have Cizhou repay this favor now. Ask the heir to send a letter to Cizhou's prefectural prefect, Zhou Gui, telling him to discount the grains sold to Dunzhou by 40,000 taels. The Ministry of Revenue can allocate fewer funds to Cizhou and instead put that money toward house demolition subsidies. Yu Xiaozai pondered it. But at the end of the day, appropriating public ditches is still a crime. Can the Ministry of Revenue stand behind this decision? The illegal appropriation of public ditches should indeed be punished under the law, but these are special circumstances. We can't apply the same rigid rules to a situation every time. Shen Zichuan paused. The imperial court pities the disaster victims. This subsidy is a kindness, an act of imperial magnanimity. Censor Cun is the most appropriate person to step forward and raise this matter. The Ministry of Revenue isn't heartless. As long as it's justifiable, the accounting is clear, and the reserve is sufficient, they'll surely proceed without delay. The annual review was just around the corner, and the evaluations that came of it were integral to the promotion of all positions within the various bureaus. Everyone would be more than happy to be graded as outstanding. So long as it was reasonable, they would certainly be willing. Returning to Cizhou, Shen Zichuan looked to Xiao Chiye. Zhongbo wants to rebuild the city this year. Although we still don't know who will be assigned to the role, it will require a great expense of manpower. The Supreme Commander will owe Cizhou a favor after this. When it comes time to rebuild the city, the manpower can come from those whose houses were demolished today. Let them send people from their households to Cizhou to provide manual labor, escorted by the Imperial Army. It shouldn't take them more than a month. This can be considered their punishment for illegally appropriating the public ditches. These 5 taels of silver will not end up owed or overdue. The ones issuing them and the ones receiving them can do so with peace of mind. What was more, Cizhou would cease to be indebted to Libei and instead enter a relationship of mutual assistance. As long as Zhou Gui wasn't a fool, he would understand it was an opportunity to make friends. As Shen Zichuan finished, Yu Xiaozai shook open the straw cloak and draped it over Cun Yu, who didn't waste a moment. He strode forward and laid a heavy hand on Shen Zichuan's shoulder. Judge Shen, time is pressing, so I'll be brief. Once this is over, I, Cun Chunyi, will prepare a simple meal in my abode and respectfully await your visit. He donned his bamboo hat and left with Yu Xiaozai. How's everything in the palace? Xiao Chiye took hold of Shen Zichuan's wrist. Tan Tai Hu looked as if he wanted to speak, but pressed his lips shut. Shen Zichuan lifted the authority token hanging from Xiao Chiye's waist and looked at it for a moment. The Empress Dowager has summoned the ministers of the various bureaus to take them to task. It's just as well you aren't among them. The public ditches must be dredged as soon as possible. Everyone was being courteous earlier, but you have to understand that if you don't unclog the ditches in the next few days, you'll be called to account. The two of them stood there together. It was inappropriate for Xiao Chiye to touch Shen Zichuan more than this, but seeing the unhealthy color on Shen Zichuan's cheeks after standing in the rain, he couldn't help but say, "The Secretariat Elder told you to keep watch in the palace, so go. Sit in the office and drink a cup of hot tea. All you have to do is keep your eyes on the door." "That's Han Cheng's job." Shen Zichuan looked down the street. "Shifu is still in the temple. It makes me worry. There's no time. Do what you need to do. I have to go with the men from the Ministry of Revenue and handle disaster relief for the victims." Xiao Chiye wanted to say more, but Han Jin was calling him, shoes in hand. He could only let go. He backed up a few steps, then turned and left with Tan Tai-hu and Chun Yang close behind. Shen Zichuan had a splitting headache, though the pouring rain had cleared his mind some. He turned around to call Gu Qingqing, and they took some men down to the districts on lower ground. Clearing the public ditches was a monumental task. The work was dirty and exhausting. The men of the Ministry of Revenue had to change their shoes and lift their hems when they waded into the water, and anyone with a title was taking refuge under a tent, refusing to go near it. In any case, this was a task Hai Liang Yi had given the Ministry of Works and the Imperial Army. They were here merely to assist. When Shen Zichuan arrived, he saw there were just a handful of men working. Many of the old-timers in the Ministry of Revenue were used to putting in no more than a token effort. These men were cunning. Unless they had something to gain, orders would fall on deaf ears. "It's about to be dark soon," Gu Qingqing observed. "Why are so few people here?" An official bowed his way over to Shen Zichuan and, fawning, invited him to sit. "They didn't want to come. The Imperial Army hasn't finished digging out the ditches, have they? Let them finish up tonight, and we can recruit more people in the morning. Your Excellency, come sit down. Look how soaked you are. Have a cup of hot tea. At least warm up. You'll freeze out here." Shen Zichuan didn't budge. He peered into the makeshift tent and smiled. "Did you set this up yourself? Well done." The official held out the tea and grinned from ear to ear. "I sure did. Everyone's been so busy. Who'd have time to think about us? It was all we could do to build it ourselves." "Well, if you can build that, then you—" His voice trailed off as the members of the embroidered uniform guard standing solemnly behind Shen Zichuan watched him without a single smile. Shen Zichuan himself showed little emotion. He accepted the tea and took a sip. The official sidled closer. "This is fine tea from Huzhou, specially steeped for your Excellency." With a flick of his wrist, Shen Zichuan splashed the tea over the official's face. The man yelped in shock and staggered back several steps. Shen Zichuan flipped the teapot over and tapped the bottom with his fingertips, emptying it of tea leaves. The smile on his face was even more bewitching amid the downpour. "This tea," Shen Zichuan said pleasantly, "was a toast from me to you. Why don't you drink it?" The official, flustered, hastily wiped the tea off his face. It was too quick." "When the King of Hell calls for you, it won't do for you to dawdle." Throwing the teacup aside, Shen Zichuan said, "The Grand Secretary gave strict orders to the embroidered uniform guard to supervise disaster relief efforts. Perhaps the threat of immediate execution hanging around your neck isn't as tight as it should be. The tea is now on the ground, but it's still up to you to drink it. If you couldn't receive it while standing, why don't I send you on your way so you can finish it 6 feet under?" The official dropped to his knees in a panic. "Your Excellency, how can you say these things? This humble subordinate is a 6th-ranked official of the Imperial Court. How could I be—" "Think who you're speaking to. The Imperial prison has no officers below the 4th rank." Gu Qingqing lifted the hem of his robe to kick the official into the water. "If the judge orders you to drink, then you must drink. You're welcome to consider whether you'd like to drink it alive or dead." The official tumbled into the sludge. As Shen Zichuan stared down at him with his hands on his blade, he cupped the water in his palms and scooped it into his mouth, crying out, "I'll drink it! I'll drink it!" The men around them, who had been lounging where they sat, jesting and lazing about together, all quietly stood and filed into orderly ranks. Shen Zichuan swept a glance across them. "Can we begin clearing the ditches immediately?" "We are at Judge Shen's disposal," they chanted as one. "I'm a mere supervisor. What would I know of the details of this work?" Shen Zichuan fished out a blue handkerchief to wipe his hands and said with a smile, "I wouldn't dream of putting you at my disposal. The embroidered uniform guard will follow your lead. Gentlemen, shall we?" Who would dare remain behind? The official kneeling in the muddy water trembled as he tried to climb up. When Shen Zichuan glanced at him, he bowed his head and stammered, "Your Excellency." "There's an entire street of water here. Shen Zichuan said soothingly before leaving. Make sure to finish before you join us. Night had descended, but the rain showed no signs of stopping. No matter how imposing the embroidered uniform guard might be, they still had to trudge through the water to do their work, soaking until they reeked all over. When Shen Zichuan next straightened up, the world spun around him. He braced his hand on a plank at the side of the ditch and steadied himself for a moment, unnoticed in the commotion. Gu Qingqing whispered, "It's no use rushing now. Rest a moment." Shen Zichuan forced a smile as Gu Qingqing walked away. He felt he mustn't open his mouth. He could already taste the bile in his throat. Pushing himself up from the plank, he bent to feel around for his water skin under the partially collapsed building. Suddenly, there was a weight on his back as something dropped over Shen Zichuan's head. The fabric covering him lifted to admit Xiao Chuye, who was panting as he burrowed his way in, shoving a still warm food box into Shen Zichuan's hands. In the next moment, he burrowed his way out and made to leave. Shen Zichuan pulled aside the overcoat draped over his head. Xiao Chuye, who had already taken a few steps away, turned back. Stepping over the collapsed debris, he crouched to cup Shen Zichuan's face in his palms and kiss him hard. He pulled back and rubbed Shen Zichuan's cheeks vigorously. The rain crashed down around them. Xiao Chuye was breathing heavily. Wordlessly, he looked at Shen Zichuan in the darkness for a split second, then turned and ran off. He leaped over all the obstacles on the ground with a stunning agility as he put back on the dirty, wet robe hanging over the crook of his arm and sped off into the alley. If time weren't so tight. Xiao Chuye tugged at his collar as he made his way across the wreckage. Stepping on filth as he hurried toward the Imperial Army, he cursed. Damn it! Poor baby is whipped. Oh, gosh. Chapter 64. Downpour. Has it not been downpour enough? The overcoat was too big. It slid down Shen Zichuan's shoulders. He tugged it back up. Warmth enveloped him as his nose was filled with Xiao Chuye's scent. Shen Zichuan fished out the handkerchief to wipe his cheeks, damp from Xiao Chuye's hand. On this dark night, with the sound of rain falling all around, he couldn't help but sniff that handkerchief again. That, too, smelled like Xiao Chuye. Shen Zichuan lowered his eyes for a moment and nuzzled the tip of his nose against the handkerchief as the gloom of his brow dissipated. The top layer of the meal box was filled with steamed, twisted rolls, while the bottom contained hot medicinal soup. Steam rose the instant he lifted the lid. Getting one's hands on a hot meal on a night like this was no easy feat. Even Xiao Chuye would have had to run like mad to make his way here before it got cold, only to go sprinting back again. Gu Qingqing had thought to find a cup of tea for Shen Zichuan. When he climbed up from the ditch and saw him drinking the medicine, he first looked astonished, then glad. It's been arranged. That's great. I was just thinking of sending someone to buy a bowl of medicine. Shen Zichuan finished and wiped the corners of his lips with his fingers. How much of this street has been torn down? Just past Ohua Pavilion. It's hard to clear out the areas where the collapse is severe. Gu Qingqing rolled up his sleeves. There's something fishy about all this. Yet another inexplicable event. Shen Zichuan sat up and put his thoughts in order. Only His Majesty himself knows who smuggled him out of the palace. If he refuses to speak, then this case is indeed dead. If you ask me, that collapse was no coincidence. Donglong Street floods every year, yet only Ohua Pavilion happened to collapse last night. Gu Qingqing gazed out into the rain, then looked back at Shen Zichuan. Any ideas? Shen Zichuan had been thinking about it since morning. The collapse would have wiped away any traces of Ohua Pavilion, but this was certainly no coincidence either. Shi Hongxuan was a man who treasured his life. He had just renovated Ohua Pavilion, and those who knew the details of the hollowed-out stage's construction were few and far between. Shen Zichuan watched the rain. He murmured, as if to himself, "No need to fret. Whoever's behind it is bound to make another move. We still don't know who the target was this time." The imperial physician retreated from the emperor's bedchamber and bowed to the empress dowager and the assembled ministers. From behind the curtain, the empress dowager leaned forward to listen to the imperial physician's detailed report of Li Jianheng's condition. When she heard the bleeding had stopped, she breathed a sigh of relief. This matter is bizarre. The empress dowager straightened in her seat. To think not a single person knew the Son of Heaven had left the palace. How can anyone sleep soundly if this is the state of our patrols in the heart of our capital? None of the old ministers uttered a word. All hung their heads in silence like clay sculptures. From my place in the imperial harem, the empress dowager continued, I shouldn't be intervening in governmental affairs, but this, once again, concerns His Majesty's safety. A mother cannot help but worry. I watched this with my hair turning gray and tears running dry. Footnote number 11, that is from the poem Bidding Farewell to My Old Mother by Huang Ji-ren. How can I take another scare like this? My ministers, I am owed an explanation. On hearing this, Pan Xiangjie's heart jumped in his chest. After a moment of silence, Kong Qiu spoke. The patrols in the inner palace might not necessarily have been able to stop His Majesty even if they wanted to. In this subject's opinion, Xi Hongxuan should be punished most severely. If he hadn't used those temptresses from foreign lands to lure His Majesty, then why would His Majesty have left the palace? That's right. The Minister of Revenue, Wei Huaigu, was the lawful elder brother of the Wei Huaxing who had so recently targeted Xiao Zhiye. Wei Huaigu was head of the Wei clan. He wasn't used to the habit of speaking out, but this time he lifted his head. Xi Hongxuan deserves to be punished, but his crime does not deserve death. This subject feels that the fault lies with the Ministry of Works. Are they not in charge of the repairs to public works in Chudu? Minister Pan, how could you allow the public ditches to grow so clogged? I'm sorry, that's funny. When he saw Wei Huaigu was about to shift the blame, Pan Xiangjie fell to his knees and beseeched the Empress Dowager. I ask that your majesties discern the truth of this matter and render fair judgment. The Ministry of Works notified the Ministry of Revenue of the blockage of the public ditches as far back as the reign of Emperor Xiande and requested they allocate money for us to carry out repairs. But the Ministry of Revenue delayed the approval of these funds again and again. What could the Ministry of Works do? This is no minor repair. Wei Huaigu was unfazed. This man was a tougher nut to crack than his brother Wei Huaxing. Any release of funds by the Ministry of Revenue must go through the Grand Secretariat. Without Secretariat Elder Hua say so, who would dare approve this spending? Besides, Chudu was cleaning up the mess that is the 6 prefectures of Zhongbo in those years. The treasury was nearly emptied. Of course, we'd have liked to help, but we didn't have the means. Everyone has their difficulties, Pan Xiangjie fired back. Why are you targeting only the Ministry of Works? The left censor-in-chief, Can Xunyi, wants to indict the Ministry of Works for negligence in irrigation works. He's saying we failed to secure the embankment of the Kailing River. But did it collapse today? No. This is proof. The Ministry of Works has never cut corners in our projects. We work diligently. Had we the money, we would have cleared the public ditches long ago. Neither the Ministry of Revenue nor the Ministry of Works was willing to shoulder the blame. Wei Huaigu and Pan Xiangjie were both elders of the 8 great clans. Neither would take a step back. They stood their ground and passed the buck back and forth. Kong Qiu held back a sneer. He came from a humble background. Hai Liangyi himself had elevated him to his current position. He could work with these ministers from the noble clans, but he would never be the same mind as them. Watching them kicking the blame around irked him to no end. The Ministry of Works had reported the matter of the ditches before. This was true. But who had reported it? Some subordinate, a minor official who worked in back offices and had never set foot in court. If Pan Xiangjie had recognized the severity of the problem, he would have taken it up with the Ministry of Revenue himself, but he hadn't done so. As for the Ministry of Revenue, they had clearly known of the issue, but what was the relationship between Wei Huaigu and Hua Siqian? These two clans were intermarried just like the rest of the 8th grade clans. Though they hadn't seemed to be on close terms in recent years, old ties remained. Wei Huaigu was far more resourceful than Wei Huaixiang. He was someone who could discuss political affairs with Hua Siqian on equal footing, but he had never brought this matter up. Everyone involved had muddled their way through. If they drowned in these political seas, then they deserved it. One could only blame their rotten luck. Sitting behind the curtain, the Empress Dowager saw through every one of these men. Hua Xiangyi stood behind her, listening with rapt attention. At last, Hai Liangyi coughed a few times. Covering his mouth with a handkerchief, he said, "There was indeed mention of this matter in the Grand Secretariat's reports, but it appeared only once, and no one followed up after that. Now that a building has collapsed, everyone remembers it. But is this the first time the water level has risen? Let's not bicker over what happened long ago. Did the water level rise in the spring of last year and the year before? Did the Ministry of Works report it then?" Pan Xiangjie turned away, voice filled with remorse. "When the Grand Secretary puts it that way, the Ministry of Works has indeed been negligent. But we really had no choice. What's important now is to dredge the ditches without delay." "That's right. The situation is critical," Wei Huaigu said. "The Ministry of Revenue has allocated money to the disaster victims. Appropriation of blame can wait until the public ditches have been cleared. Who's digging now? Is it the 8th grade battalions?" It was the Minister of War, Chen Jun, who replied. "The Imperial Army is doing it. Supreme Commander Xiao is soaking in the water as we speak." Before the Empress Dowager could respond, a palace maid rushed out from the inner room and fell to her knees. "Your Majesty, His Majesty's back is covered in rashes." The Empress Dowager jolted to her feet. "What?" Hai Liangyi doubled over and began coughing violently. Hua Xiangyi took the Empress Dowager's arm to support her and promptly made a decision. "Summon the imperial physicians and hold the Secretariat Elder steady, quickly." Shi Hongxuan, too, had broken out in a rash. The military medic of the 8th grade battalions was first to discover it. He promptly grabbed the hem of his robe and raced out to report to Han Jin. Han Jin wiped his face, dumbfounded. "Isn't it just a rash? Just get him warmed up and he'll be fine." "It's not." The medic was so anxious he stumped his foot. "How can this be just a rash? It's an infectious disease." Han Jin froze. The surrounding men of the 8th grade battalions, still up to their knees in the water, had all gone pale. Han Jin turned and saw the Imperial Army bustling about a short distance away. He sloshed through the flood to them and grabbed Chen Yang, yelling, "Where is the Supreme Commander? Call him over. It's an emergency." Xiao Chuye pushed a broken plank aside and waded over. "What is it?" Han Jin smeared his dirty, shaking hands on his clothes. "We have to stop the demolition, and we can't stand around in this water anymore. Supreme Commander, an epidemic has broken out." There was a cold glint in Xiao Chuye's eyes. "Who caught it?" "Shi Hongxuan." Han Jin's breathing was panicked. "Then is His Majesty?" "Gu Jin," Xiao Chuye called out. "Run to the palace and report this matter to Secretariat Elder Hai, immediately." Gu Jin climbed up the embankment and sped off. Within a few steps, he had somersaulted onto the rooftop and stepped across the ridge of the roof to leap his way to the palace gates. "Take me to Shi Hongxuan," said Xiao Chuye steadily. "Now." Shi Hongxuan was delirious with fever. The medicine that had just been applied to his crushed legs was already damp with sweat. He lay on the bed, incoherent. The medic dabbed sweat from his own brow and explained. 4 hours ago, he looked as if he had caught a chill. I gave him medicine, and his fever subsided. But when I examined him just now, his fever had gotten much worse. When I changed the poultices on his legs, he was entirely covered in these rashes." Xiao Chuye looked at the red welts. "Are you sure it's contagious?" "During the years of Yongyi, a pox like this broke out in the city of Dancheng," the medic explained. "It was reported to the Court of Imperial Physicians. They'll have records of it on file. Supreme Commander, once this rash spreads over the body, the patient will run a high fever. In another 4 hours, they'll fall unconscious and vomit continuously. I'm afraid some of the people displaced by the flood might already be sick. The Temple of Guilt must arrange for the decoction of the appropriate herbs before it spreads further. Now truly afraid, Han Jin asked, "What caused this? If we don't know how we got it, how can we continue draining this ditch?" "We're arriving at the spring thaw," the medic said. "It's damp and cold, and the low-lying district has been gathering sewage and filth all year. Their houses are clustered together, so cramped most don't even have windows. Lack of sunlight will make people prone to illness." If that's the case, how did Shi Hongxuan get infected? Xiao Chuye furrowed his brow. Ohua Pavilion is on high ground, and servants clean the connected alleys behind it. There's no contact with any filth. Did he get infected just because he soaked in the swill water for a few hours during the collapse? The medic hesitated. He wiped his sweat again and mustered the courage to say, "I'll be honest with you, Supreme Commander. I suspect he didn't contract this illness after the cave-in, but from fooling around in the brothel before then. But if Second Young Master Xi is already burning up, then His Majesty—" "Supreme Commander!" Meng Jue lifted the curtain and entered, face grave. "More than 10 people have collapsed in the Temple of Guilt. 2 men here from the Ministry of Revenue have also collapsed." Xiao Chuye was preparing to issue new commands when Chun Yang charged in next, bringing a gust of rainwater with him. "Master, Lao Hu is down with a fever." Dang. The sound of the rain outside grew suddenly urgent. Like battle drums pounding on all sides, it poured down with a vengeance, determined to shatter this pitch-black night. Xiao Chuye dashed out into the downpour. "It'll be too late if we wait for approval. Go, fetch herbs from all the apothecaries on Shunwu Street. Take anyone who's weak, anyone with a cold, fever, or vomiting, to the Temple of Guilt, and evacuate everyone who's healthy. Those on duty from the Ministry of Revenue must start decocting herbs immediately." "Ding Tao." "Gongzi," Ding Tao answered. Xiao Chuye dragged Ding Tao over, chest heaving as he ordered in a hushed tone, "Tell Shan Zichuan to get out of there now." Oh, y'all. Oh shoot, I'm in reverb. Hold on. These chapters, we're doing the most. And I mean that in the nicest way possible. I am not at all upset, but just like, dang, can we catch a break? Apparently we cannot. So let's go ahead and discuss these chapters, right? Yeah. We're going to go with chapter 61 first, which is entitled Collapse. So we start out rain and snow. Yay. Very exciting. Chun Yang is making sure that Xiao Chuye and Shen Zichuan are going to be taken care of, as well as the cook. The cook is making sure they're going to be taken care of because he heard about Shen Zichuan. He's taking care of everybody that was on guard last night. And yeah, Shen Zichuan is ill. But man ain't taking a break. Why is he not taking a break? Because of his predicament. All eyes are on him. He's new in his position. We already know this, right? He's in a precarious situation. So he has to be present and worry about looks, even in the midst of being ill, which is really, really sucky. But anyway, we go on. I have a highlight apparently on page 241. So I'm going to go see what that is. Oh, yes. I just thought it was nice that on page 241, after it was talking about, the maid servants were doing this and everybody was doing that, it ends that scene with "the masters were awake." Shan Zichuan and Xiao Chuye, the masters. Okay, y'all picking up what I'm putting down? Like, it didn't say the master and Shan Zichuan were awake, but the masters. Okay. Let's calm down. So anyway, they're getting up, getting ready for the day. They're like, Xiao Chuye is like, if something happened, you would have heard about it. Well then, here comes knocking. What happened? Tantai, who was like, "Hey, just thought you'd like to know that Ohua Pavilion collapsed. And not only is Shi Hongxuan trapped, but the Emperor is trapped." Lovely. Absolutely freaking lovely. Why is the Emperor trapped, you say? Because he decided to sneak out. And this unfortunately, people didn't realize for a while until checking and then like, oh my gosh, he's not in his bed. Where's the emperor? Lord, this is exactly what Shan Zitran said was going to happen. However, he probably wasn't thinking it was going to happen this way. Remember when Shi Hongshuan was like, I've run out of favor with the emperor, and he was like, he's not going to change. A tiger's not going to change its stripes just from a few words. Like, it'll happen eventually. Well, it did. He snuck out to Ohua Pavilion. Oh my gosh. And so the question is, who helped the emperor sneak out? But anyway, let's keep moving forward. We have a character who's been introduced. His name is Pan Xiangjie, and he is part of the Ministry of Works. And he's relevant because he's part of a lot of arguments in these chapters. So anyway, on page 244, I have a note. Oh, I just said that. My note, yeah, Hai Liang Yi was just like, he would go this far just to play. That's what Shan Zitran said would happen. So anyway, basically, right now, the most important thing, because Ohua Pavilion is fallen, there's flooding, and all of this stuff is to unclog the freaking ditches or the city is going to flood. And people are taking time to try and place blame and shirk blame. And it's like, now is not the time for us to be figuring out who is to blame for anything. What we are supposed to be figuring out, which Hai Liang Yi brings everybody back to their senses, right? He reminds them what's important. What's important is to handle this issue. And so he's allocating duties, allocating funds. He's like, all right, y'all listen to me. Boom, boom. This is what we're about to do. All of y'all pull yourselves together before I slap y'all in the face. Oh, he didn't say that part. I said that. And he even mentioned to tear down the illegally built houses, right? So we keep going forward. And we see that, also everyone's supposed to be centralized to get aid in the Temple of Guilt, which we know his Shifu is there, Shan Zitran's Shifu, but his Xianqiang, his teacher, is also there as well, which at this rate, still nobody knows about. Anyway, let's keep going. So Shi Hongshuan and Li Jianheng are trapped in this rubble underneath all of that mess, right? In the water and everything. And Shi Hongshuan starts to get a little bit of gusto and speaking his mind. And he's like, I'm on death's door, yo. So I'm going to just say whatever's on my mind. So we get a little peek of it. And he mentions Li Jianheng's real mother and how she drowned and just saying, the cycle is repeating. This is clearly a sore spot, which I was like, I don't know how sore. But, oh yeah, best believe. The next chapter, it gave us how sore it was. The chapter, which was entitled Family Background. Y'all, whew. So his mom was a palace maid, a lowly little palace maid. And when he was brought to the palace, he was essentially given basic necessities to survive, but he was not at all cared for because there was Li Jianyuan or Xiande, the Xiande emperor, and then there was the crown prince. Those were the two ones to be cared for, not him. And so not only was he given the bare minimum for survival, he was also uneducated and bullied. When he was supposed to be in school, this man was not in school. And so like his nurse, the nurse had the audacity to be bullying him, malnourishing him. And, one time he ended up telling Li Jianyuan, or the Xiande emperor, but not the emperor at that time. I'm just keep referring to him as Xiande. But he told on his nurse, and Xiande told his eunuch. The eunuch who was berated ended up berating and beating her. So then she decided, I'm going to lash out. I'm going to retaliate and give you cold food then. And I'm going to talk shit to you all the time. And so we have this. We also learn that his mother was constantly sick and she didn't even get the chance to meet her own freaking son. And then we move to page 250, where we learn that the Guangcheng emperor, this was the Empress Dowager's husband, for the first fucking time, he met Li Jianheng, his son, at the age of 5. Where the hell you been, Guangcheng? Huh? Where the hell have you been in these 5 years of your son's life? Y'all both in the palace, but you don't know what's going on with him. And then you have the audacity to ask him questions and then be upset once you realize that he is dumb, that he is uneducated. But do you know why he's uneducated? Because instead of receiving the education that he was supposed to get, he was being bullied and barely taken care of by a freaking nurse. So of course he doesn't have the education that you would expect for him to have, like your other two kiddos. And I'm so upset that because of this interaction between father and son, that one interaction was the only interaction that they ever had. So after you saw that your son was an idiot, instead of being like, oh, let's get my son educated, instead you were like, oh, fuck this child. The audacity. I'm so upset. Like freaking upset about this upbringing that he had. And so then we go on to learn that Li Jianheng, so his brother, the Xiande Emperor, he also thought his brother was stupid, which he was. He was, dumb, if you will. But he took pity on him and he was like, I'm going to take my brother to classes with me because my brother may be dumb, but I don't think he needs to stay dumb. He pitied him. But what happened? All those other brothers who were living in a life of luxury compared to what he was receiving, which at this time was absolutely not freaking luxury, they were being mean to him as well. They were teaching him things that he didn't need to do, like bowing, kowtowing to them, and just being so mean, unless Li Jianyuan was around. And this mistreatment led him to not even wanting to pursue an education. So he would fake sick and eventually got to a point where even Li Jianyuan, the only person that was there that really truly showed some kind of care, who believed in him, eventually was like, oh no, so he's just a lost cause, which really, really sucks. And then we move forward to one day he's crawling through this little dog hole or whatever that the eunuch sent him through, and they're laughing, giggling and everything. And he sees his mother for the first time. But he doesn't know that it's her. And encouraged by those down low, dirty, filthy servants and eunuchs to thrash her verbally, he talks down to his own mother, unknowing that it's his mother. And then we move forward. He wanted to go pee-pee, but he caught the nurse screwing around. And after that, she was nice to him because she was afraid that he would tell that she was screwing somebody on duty or whatever. So that same year, though, from these candies she was giving him and everything, he was also giving them to Li Jianyuan. And his brother got sick. Xiande got sick. And they didn't know what the cause of this was. And so the nurse basically spins this story and is like, oh, it's that woman that you visited, your mother. That woman that you visited, it's her fault why I'm not giving you the candy anymore because she found out and you can't have it anymore. And so all you need to do is just spin this story and say that, she was giving you the blah, blah, blah snore. We're not going to go through all of that again. And I hate it. I hate this so much because in the middle of the night, boy was sleeping or minding his own business. And the nurse, I don't even know if his brother was told her to go get him or if she just decided to go get him and bring him to see his mother killed, drowned. The cruelty. So if Li Jianyuan instructed her to do that, then he's cruel. And there is a part of him that I do not like now. I don't even care that he was a child. But if he did not instruct her and the nurse herself just decided, I want him to see his own mother get killed, then I really, more than Muzhu, want to toss her down the well. In fact, let's make sure there's no water in the well when we toss her down. If that's the case. This is just all speculation, if, okay? So anyway, it wasn't until, years later when, it was decided, let's just indulge in his play and in being with girls and stuff like that, that he eventually found out the name of that woman who is also the name of his mother, which was Yue. The guilt and shame he must feel from knowing that because he was young and naive and did not know any better, that the story he told, that he was told to tell, is the reason his mother is dead. Damn. Anyway, I can understand why he would not want to talk about it. And now, with that in mind, I definitely understood when he was like, the Empress Dowager is our mother. He don't want to remember that, and I can't fault him for that. So then we move forward, and I'm glad, obviously I was going to keep reading. That I kept reading, though. I'm glad I kept reading, because at first, when Shi Hongxuan started talking, I was like, sir, you need to watch your mouth. Like, are you just gonna pop off on the emperor, because you think y'all about to die and you could say whatever you want and then that's the end? But that ended up not being the case. So the way that I kind of view everything with Shi Hongxuan in his whole little speech is he's, in a roundabout way, calling Li Jianheng pathetic for letting people trample over him, for being so miserable when he has the highest position possible, and he's like, we both came from low birth moms. And we both have our sob stories. Everybody is pitiful. Everybody, not everybody, everybody got their sob story. Okay? You felt bad for Xiaowar, so you gave him this little position. Okay, feel bad for me. Here's my whole story. You gonna give me a little something, something? Everybody has a sob story. Shen Zichuan, he's got a sob story. Who cares? He's like, is anyone gonna pity you and your sob story? And then he just goes on and he's just like, look, you are so grateful to Xiao Chiye for saving your life and doing blah, blah, blah. That's what he was supposed to do. Okay. And if he was truly sincere to you, why would he let his brother say everything that he said? Which honestly, I still see no problem, but that's just me personally, because it was real. Xiao Jiming was hella real in that scenario, but we digress. And so he just goes on this whole speech, it kind of sort of insulting Li Jianheng and calling him uneducated and pathetic, saying everybody makes fun of you because of that. But what's your name? Your surname is Li. No one cares about anything else because your name is Li Jianheng. You are superior to Xiao Chiye. You were always his master. He serves you. Everybody serves you. You are the son of heaven. And who cares if he was a traitor or if he has ill intent? All you got to do is raise your hand and say, handle it, and they'll be handled. Which, nice speech, but it's Li Bei. Let's not play around. It's Li Bei. Don't think that they would be so easily taken down. But okay, Shi Hongxuan. So he goes through that whole little speech. And I even thought it was funny when he was like, they're laughing at you because you're uneducated and cowardly. Let them talk. The blade isn't against their throats. When it is, 9 out of 10 times, they will piss their pants. I'm going to assume he is not talking about the Li Bei armored cavalry because they risk their lives plenty of times. They are not pissing their pants against death. So maybe he's talking about other people. Anyway, so we get to a point where basically, it's just like everything that he's done to take down his brother, that was not easy. And then on page 257, though, it says, not to mention the good fortune of meeting such a rare good master as Li Jianheng. And I really wanted to point that out because, everybody's always scheming, trying to advance plots for their own gain and everything. But as I say, as I'm not the creator of this expression, but as somebody said, and I'm going to say it in the way that I personally say it / remember it, is that even criminals have a family. Even evil people have people that they care for, people that they love, or people that they like. And so I just wanted to point this moment out here because it said that it wasn't easy for him to have the good fortune of meeting such a rare good master as Li Jianheng. So I just think it's important to note, I hope I'm not being deceived, but just going on the way that it was written, that he actually likes the emperor as a person, and he thinks that it was his good fortune to have met him. So anyway, continuing on. So he knows that he had to give this grand speech to hopefully get Li Jianheng to feel motivated by him and to be encouraged by him. And in that way, in that life and death situation together, to form some kind of bond that could hopefully have him in the emperor's favor. Why? Because he knows with what happened, he's going to be prime suspect number one. Even though he's in the chaos himself, it's going to be his fault because he is the one that made the emperor sneak out, blah, 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 which was mentioned later. So he's like, I got to get the emperor on my side, because if the emperor is on my side, then I will automatically be absolved. I ain't do this. I don't know who did this, but the evidence is going to be washed away in the flooding. So then we also have, eventually Xiao Chuye saves the emperor. They get him out. And then he sees Xi Hongxuan and he's just staring at him like, think I'm going to take my precious little time before I actually help you out, But then eventually he does get him, but like, not to save him necessarily. He was choking him. I can't even be mad because he was like, you were trying to take me down, sir. So, and you were trying to take me down for something that could have ended with my life ending, possibly my family's life ending. So I'm going to take this moment to suffocate you as much as I can. Oh, wait, there are people nearby watching. The emperor was also conscious. He might remember that Xi Hongxuan was alive, so I can't do nothing. And then he's suddenly dead. And he was like, whew. Hold up. But boy, when Xi Hongxuan said, fuck your mother, and he was like, say it one more again. Say it one more again. Now, for anyone who does not know that expression, honestly, I've never heard it outside of Black households. So to me, this is like a Black household staple. Say it one more again. I think it's clear what that means. Say it again. Say it one more time. But instead of saying say it again, say it one more again. Okay. So then we move to chapter 63, which is called Dredging the Ditches. And what does it do? It rains some more. Still. But anyway, we have the Empress Dowager who comes into the picture. And again, this goes back to my statement that even bad people have people that they care about and love. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that the Empress Dowager cares that deeply or whatever, because we know what she tried to do before. But considering things as of recent and potentially how his perspective of her has changed in such a short amount of time, it's possible that she could have stopped seeing him necessarily as a threat and possibly someone that she could use. We just don't know. I just don't know. At the end of the day, or it could be the case that since he is the emperor, like we can't kill him yet until we know we have a good replacement. I don't know. Who knows? I'm not saying she's showing genuine concern or disingenuous concern. The point is she is showing concern for her imperial son and of course the officials, because they have been running back to the capital as well, all in that stuff. And she's like, these people are going to get sick. And the last thing we need is for everybody to be out of commission. Take care of the officials, my guy. And so then we also learned that the civilians, because Hai Liangyi said demolish all the places, the homes, the civilians are not willing to have their homes demolished. I mean, obviously. So even if their homes are shabby, Tan Tai-hu is like, look, they want a roof over their heads. Give them some money, some subsidy to convince them to allow this to happen. So then we have Yu Xiaocai, which I don't remember his position. Doesn't matter. All that matters is he's talking, right? So he's trying to de-escalate the situation because people getting all up in their feelings and everything. And he's like, hey, let me take the time to explain why we can't just throw money at them. He's like, first off, these people, not all of them, but some of these people illegally expanded their territory and, clogged the dregs or whatever, the ditches. And not only that, the officials want to help, even if it's for selfish reasons, even if it's just because they want to look good for evaluations that are coming up. The problem is, by their standards, they're broke. Okay. They is broke. And the plowing season is coming, but there's not going to be a harvest because of natural disasters that took place the year before. And so many of the funds that were given by the Ministry of Revenue were allocated to getting harvest from neighboring places because there was no harvest, no food. You know what I'm saying? So they had to get it from somewhere else. And then again, also, he's like giving money to people who did something illegal. So giving them a reward instead of a punishment? I don't think so. Then we have our beloved Lanzhou. My baby, he comes in to offer a solution. Okay, he said, 有问题，我有一个解决 solution. Okay, I think that's correct. It's been a minute. So anyway, he comes with the solution, and I feel like out of everything that I read, this is probably the one thing that I truly need to break down just in case anyone did not understand it. I had to reread it just to make sure I was getting what T97 was putting down. So here it is. While there are certain places that are lacking grain, lacking harvest, right? Cizhou is brimming with harvest. And Li Bei had already put aside 40,000 taels to relieve Cizhou, right? They're right next to the northeast Provisions Trail. So it was very easy for them to help Cizhou. So he's saying, let's send a letter to Cizhou asking them, or the guy's name was Zhou Gui or something like that, asking him to discount the grain by that same amount that was given to them, while also having the Ministry of Revenue give them a little less money and delegate it toward the home demolition fund, destroying the homes and taking care of what else needs to be done in that case. And he's saying when it comes time, because Zhongbo suffered from the war all those years ago, right? They're still wanting to rebuild, and this rebuilding has been taking a freakishly long amount of time. When it comes time to do that, all those peoples who had their households illegally expanded, they can send laborers to help rebuild as their punishment. It'd probably take about a month, shouldn't take too long, but a month of labor for their people would serve as a great punishment. Not only that, but having this kind of like push and pull of I help you, you help me, I help you between Cizhou and Li Bei and just working all of that out, then Cizhou would no longer be indebted to Li Bei, but more so of that friendship of I'll help you, you helped me in this scenario, so I'll help you, and then eventually you'll help me again. And it's mentioned that the ditches, they need to be dredged ASAP. Okay? A freaking sap. And so if that doesn't happen, then it's going to be Xiao Zhiye who's in trouble. So anyway, we see that, yes, Shan Zichuan is sick. But he's still working because he has to handle disaster relief. So then when we get to page 269, apparently I have a note. It also says, still raining. Still raining. When Shan Zichuan arrives at this disaster relief, what does he see? The officials are chilling, drinking tea, like, oh, Shan Zichuan, look at you, sir. It's raining. Come under my tent and let's chill, because it's you don't want to catch a cold, you don't want to get ill. Meanwhile, he's already ill. And so what ends up happening is that Shan Zichuan has to give them a little kind motivation to get to work. Do I need to mention what that kind motivation was? I think not. That was very clear. So then, at the end of this beloved chapter, we get Xiao Zhiye, who is running over to Shan Zichuan, and he puts a coat over him and provides him with a box of food. And he's about to go away, but then Shan Zichuan looks up and he sees him, and so he's like, now that I'm looking at him, I gotta give him a kiss. So he kisses him, and then he runs off, which is hilarious. But I know he's running off because he has to get back to work. But he really needed to make sure that he got his baby some food and some cover. And I was just like, oh my gosh, this man is so whipped. And even at the end of the chapter, he was like, if time weren't so tight, he probably would have taken a little bit more time. And then, even as he's leaving, he cursed and he's like, damn it. And I was like, he's probably damming it up because he knows he's whipped. What was that question he was asking before of what he wanted to ask? Zuo Qianqiu, can desire be conquered? Only he knows the answer to that. Well, we know the answer as well. And clearly it's no. So then we move to the final chapter for today, and that is chapter 64, Downpour. Because it wasn't raining enough already. And we opened the chapter with a little sniff, sniff. Because Shanzichan is sniffing the coat. He's sniffing the handkerchief and he's like, oh, it all smells like Xiao Chuye. I just need more Xiao Chuye smell. And eventually Good Qing Qing comes up because he was about to get Shanzichan some food. Meanwhile, see, he's already got food and medicine. He's like, oh, great. But then they're like, this whole thing is suspicious. But ultimately, His Majesty is the one who determines if this whole thing is going to be a dead case or if it's going to be alive. So we just have to see. Anyway, we get back to the Empress Dowager, who is upset about everything that has happened thus far. She's like, this is really bizarre. I shouldn't even have to be involved in this case. Y'all pissing me off, and I deserve an explanation. So, of course, Kongqiu is like, the problem lies with Xi Hongxuan. For tempting His Majesty, we need to punish him. So what happens? These beloved people, these nobles, decide, oh, yes, right, let's blame Xi Hongxuan. And they go back to the blame game. So it's the Ministry of Works versus the Ministry of Revenue versus the common people. Okay, yet again. We have it with the Ministry of Works like, we reported this to you, but you didn't give us the funds. Then we have the Ministry of Revenue saying, we're low on money. We're trying to take care of other things. No one wants to take the blame, okay? And here's the thing. The Ministry of Works, they did indeed report the issue. But who did they send? Someone who could be easily ignored. A low-level official to report this issue. And then Hai Liang Yi. I'm sorry, before I even get to Hai Liang Yi, even the Empress Dowager is able to see through this shit, right? She's just like, okay, y'all are just, okay, whatever. So then we get to Hai Liang Yi, who's like, okay, I'm really tired of y'all going back and forth. Are we going to pretend like that this wasn't an issue before? You talking about you ain't got money, you talking about you done reported it already, blah, blah, snore. But is this the first time that this has happened? Has it not happened before? And you reported it once. Did you report it again when the issue came up again? Oh, and when he brought that logic into it, oh, suddenly everybody wanted to shift to the most important thing. Fixing the fucking problem. Because no one wants to take blame. And now that he mentioned this, that could definitely land blame on someone. They're like, right. I mean, let's not focus on that. What's most important is fixing the issue, right? That was always the most important issue. But no one really truly cared until suddenly the emperor was the one who was under the building. If this is something that had been taken care of, even if it was slowly taken care of, even if it was something that you didn't have the funds for, but you did what you could from the beginning, the first time it was reported, this may not have been an issue today. Why are we being like the police and waiting until the killing has already happened before we arrive? Why are we being like the police and showing up after the devastation? Okay, I'm really sorry. I shouldn't have said that. I was just being silly. That's just something that people say a lot of times. The police show up at the end. But that's not always the case for anyone who may be an officer. I'm just talking. Police do not always show up when it's too late. Thank you, police, for doing your job when you do your jobs. Thank you so much. Anyway, the point is, these issues, the hell? I'm sorry. I don't know if y'all heard that. I heard some. Okay, whatever. The point is, these are issues that could have been avoided. Anyway, then we move forward, finding out the emperor and Xi Hongxuan are what? Covered in rashes. Probably the same rashes as Shan Zichuan. Okay. Anyway, then there's the question of, are these rashes contagious? Okay. And yes, they're contagious. And so it's possible that with Xi Hongxuan, He got these rashes from fooling around at Old Hua Pavilion. Probably had it then, and then the rashes came. Because the rashes don't just, you get the sickness and then it comes like ASAP. This isn't supernatural stuff that may show up in some other kinds of books. This is a slow progression, real human kind of thing, right? And so they're like, oh my gosh, well, if this was with him and the emperor, oh shoot. Does the emperor have it? Which, yes, he does, but they don't know that yet. So Xiao Zhiye is like, send him there, blah, 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 blah. And then, of course, he gets to Ding Tao, and he's like, okay, well, no, before he gets to Ding Tao, he was like, we need to have the concoctions made as fast as possible. We need to evacuate all of the healthy people away from the unhealthy people. And then he quietly sends Ding Tao to go tell Lanzhou to get out of the Temple of Guilt. He's like, get my baby out of there right now, because he's already sick. He's already tired. He's already loopy. I don't want him to get sicker. So that is where we ended. And y'all, it was a lot. It is January 30th when I am reading this. I'm not really sure when y'all are going to get this video, but I was just like, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. So anyway, with that being said, we only have a couple videos left. And when I say a couple, I'm actually literally meaning a couple. Our next session, we are going to be reading, because we got 10 chapters left. So on one of the videos, we're going to be reading 6 chapters. On another video, we're going to be reading 5 chapters. I mean, because I meant to say we have 11 chapters left, sorry. And on Friday, hold on, let me pull this up. Yes. If you haven't already seen the calendar, the February calendar that I gave you all, Friday the 6th, we will be meeting at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to discuss the final 11 chapters from 65 all the way to 75. And let me make sure that's actually 10. 65, 6, 7, 8, 9, 70, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep, 11. So anyway, that's that. Again, like I said, I don't know when exactly I'm releasing this video, but depending on when, it's definitely going to be before February the 5th. So I just want to point out that February the 5th, we are meeting to talk live about some chapters of The Salted Fish. And yeah, I hope you all felt feelings in these chapters. I can't even say enjoyed. I mean, I enjoyed reading, but they weren't enjoyable. They were quite traumatizing, honestly. Please let me know your thoughts and reactions. I can't wait to hear from you guys. We are almost done with this volume, and I don't know what to do with myself. Yeah, I genuinely don't know what to do with myself. I also just really quickly wanted to mention that for the Chinese New Year, we are celebrating that together. It's later in the month, but it is going to be on Tuesday, February the 17th. That's when Chinese New Year starts, because they do like 2-week celebration. Okay, so we are going to have a celebration at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we're going to have a blast. So I hope you guys are ready for that. I'll give you more details in some other video, but it's going to be great. Yeah, it's going to be fun. Oh, it's going to be wonderful. Okay, now I'm just doing too much. I need to go and read some more chapters. So I hope you all enjoyed. I will see you all next time. 我爱你们。